Hello, everybody. Welcome to the session on the McKinsey Pyramid Model of Structured Communication. As usual, I'm very excited to be here and conduct this session. My name is Swapnil Kamat. I'm the CEO of Work Better Training. Along with me, I have Arunima Kamat. Arunima Kamat is the person, the content expert who has developed this content and all the other content that you're going to see as a part of the coaching program. And she's one of the best in the industry in the field of content developing for soft skills and behavior related. So thank you, Arunima, for being here. The reason why we have Arunima here is because we thought, just in case while doing the session, if I missed out on anything or there's a particular question that she knows typically comes from participants on this issue, that Arunima would be the one to kind of bring that up if I miss out on anything or she thinks is a pertinent question to be asked there. So it becomes like an actual session that you're attending where she plays the role of the participant on your behalf. Okay, so Arunima, you can put your camera off if you want, and then put it on as in when you have a question or have to say something with regards to how the program is going. Okay.
Sure.
Now, about the McKinsey Pyramid Model of Communication, right? Before we get started. In my opinion, those of you all who have come for this particular coaching class, if you master the McKinsey Pyramid Model of Communication, truly understand it, truly practice it, truly implement it, this one model alone will improve your ability to communicate by anything between 25 to 50%. Just this one model alone. This is not something that I'm just saying. This comes from me being a soft skills facilitator and trainer over the past 10 years, where at times I've literally been in a classroom every day training on subjects of communication and soft skills, right? So this is 10 years of experience telling me that no other model of communication helps as much in improving a person's communication as this model does. I have seen literally people turn around their communication skills overnight on truly understanding and taking the effort to then implement this model. And when I mean overnight, right? As you must be aware, Work Better, the company that I founded and am the CEO of, is considered to be India's #1 soft skills training company. If you go to our website, if you see our client list, any big company in India that you could think of trains their people on soft skills through us, right? So the who's who, 350, 400 of the biggest companies in India and startups train through us. So typically the way the sessions happen, because they don't do coaching, but they put 25, 30 people in the room. And when I teach them something like this, and even we don't get each and every person to participate because there's not enough time in a classroom, but whoever truly learns this thing and puts it into action, we have seen that improvement literally happen overnight in that person, right? So therefore, please pay careful attention to this class. Please take this class very seriously. And even your coaching session, when you get to that, ensure that you put the effort to actually understand and implement this model, because that's the kind of impact that you're going to see after it, right? So I couldn't tell you more about the importance of understanding this subject and the importance of this subject. Okay. Now, why should we structure our communication, right? So all effective communicators, the reason why they communicate well is because they rely on structuring their thoughts very well. Research shows that people retain structured information up to 40% more accurately than if your communication is unstructured, right? 40% more. All research around communication shows this thing. Having a clear structure while communicating helps in two ways. It allows you to understand and organize your ideas, and it makes it easier for your listener to understand your message and stay focused, right? Now, I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on that. Effective communication is about me getting a message across to you specifically, clearly, and without any doubt. So if I have to get a message across to you specifically, clearly, without any doubt, first, I need to understand my own message specifically, clearly, and without any doubt. If I don't understand my own message specifically, clearly, and without any doubt, I cannot get that message across to you specifically, clearly, without any doubt, right? Does that make sense to you? And when you structure your communication, it helps you understand and organize your ideas better first. So naturally, the person in front of you also finds it easier to understand those ideas that you're trying to get across, right? So it's really that simple and commonsensical. If you don't understand what you're talking about, don't expect the person or people that you're communicating to understand what you're speaking about, right? So yeah, that's the reason why structuring your communication is so important to effective communication. Now, let me tell you to start with, since we're going to be talking about the McKinsey Pyramid Model, let's tell you a little bit about this right now. As the name suggests, the McKinsey Pyramid Model was developed by the very prominent and consulting firm, which is called McKinsey and Company. It's considered as one of the foremost consulting companies all around the world. And Barbara Minto, the head of the training in the 70s, developed this model. This model was there even prior to McKinsey in some other way, but she kind of structured it a lot better than what it was developed earlier, right? Using this principle, the consultants from McKinsey that would deal with very complex problems could take large amounts of information and structure it to simplify the story and yet retain the details of it, right? So very complex issues could be communicated by them in a very simple and structured fashion. That's what this model did. The beauty of the McKinsey model, right? And I can go on about it because I love this model so much, is it can be used both in written communication, verbal communication, in short communication, in detailed communication, in presentations. So just about in every format you can go about using this way of communicating, right? So it's not just restricted to written or verbal, short or long. It just works across the board, right? And the other thing is, it's a model that helps you put together your thoughts extremely quickly. So often what happens is when you learn models that are very complicated in nature, it becomes difficult for you to use those models to quickly do something. This is the beauty of the McKinsey model, right? It's simple to understand, it's simple to implement, and yet it is extremely insightful in nature, right? And that makes it, in my opinion, the most important thing to learn if you want to improve your communication. And I'm shocked that this model is not taught more often, right? So I think it should be taught to just about everyone. And this is the beauty of it. It's simple to understand, simple to execute, and damn insightful in nature, right? So that's a little about the McKinsey model. Now, the best way to understand the McKinsey model is through a diagram, but I'm just going to run you through a couple of points before I actually show you the structure of the McKinsey pyramid model, right? So the McKinsey pyramid starts with the person communicating or initiating the message being clear on what his objective is, or what the final answer or conclusion is that he's trying to get across to the other person. And I want to explain each one of these things to you as we go along, right? So the principle starts with you being clear on the objective, the answer or the conclusion that you have of what you want to talk about. And then you follow that particular objective up by stating 3 to 5 main points or arguments. And then you support each one of those 3 points with 2 to 3 subpoints each. So each one of those subpoints in turn should have some data, some facts, some statistics, some examples, some benefits. And again, when you see visually, that's when you understand it much better. Just like the name implies, the idea is to present your communication like a pyramid, right? Like you saw on the first slide, the main point at the top of that pyramid, and then branching into a lot of the supporting arguments which is there, right? I know after reading this, you're not going to get clarity on it, but this is just the start of this thing, right? Now, let's look at the core structure of the McKinsey pyramid model. Now, like I said, it starts with the objective or the final solution. So I'd want to explain this to you here itself for you to get an understanding, and then we have another slide on this. But in the last class, if you remember, when we spoke about the fundamentals of communication, we discussed what objective meant, right? Objective of communication. An objective of communication basically means what's the goal of your communication, what's the purpose of your communication, what do you wish to achieve at the end of your communication, right? So this is what objective of communication actually means. What's the goal of your communication? What's the purpose? What do you wish to achieve at the end of the communication, right? Now, the best way to determine what your objective is to think, what action exactly do I want from the recipient at the end of my communication? So discussed this in the last class where we said, if you're making a presentation, you need to think at the end of my presentation, or when I put the end slide, what action exactly do I want from the people sitting in front of me? And examples of that could be, the action that I want is an in principle approval on this project. The action that I want is an approval of 5 lakh rupees to take this project forward. The objective sometimes could be, like it is in an example that we'll give you further, the objective could be to make a person feel extremely good about themselves who's there in an audience. The objective could be to get the opinion of the audience on the subject that you're presenting on. So the objectives could be multiple, but you need to be, if you want to be a good communicator, you need to be crystal clear about what that objective is. You need to understand it very specifically. And again, the best way to understand it specifically is to think, what action exactly do I want from the audience, right? Now, what is the solution, or the final solution means? Very often when the consultants from McKinsey, and you should read a little more about McKinsey if you have the time, if you don't know about McKinsey, very often the consultants from McKinsey, they would have to go to the clients and basically start their discussion by telling them what is the final solution that they've come with, right? And the way they would go about doing that, they would say that, okay, we'd like to start this meeting by telling you what our conclusion is. Our conclusion based on our study is that we need to move our factory from Bombay to Goa. This is the conclusion that we've come up with based on what you asked us to study, right? And we need to do that. We need to move our factory from Bombay to Goa before the end of 2021, right? So they would start the meeting with the final conclusion or final solution or the final answer, right, that they had on that particular issue. Then they go about explaining the entire thing, right? So every time you're communicating or initiating a message that you need to send across to people, you need to think, okay, what's the objective that I have behind this? Number two, if you're presenting some solution, you need to know what's the exact solution that I am presenting. What's that final answer that I'm giving people? And then the rest of the model follows from there. If you are not clear on your objective, you are never going to be a good communicator, a business communicator for sure. Everyone that is a good business communicator is crystal clear on what their objective is. So take a whole amount of time, and like I said, the best way to think about it, the specific action that you want from the other side at the end. If you cannot do that, you're never going to be able to nail being a good communicator, right? In the context of business, work, or management, right? Now, once you're clear on what the objective is, you need to think, okay, of the 3 points that will help you meet your objective, or the 3 points that will help you justify the solution that you are giving to the person ahead of you, right? So if I take the previous examples that I gave you, if your objective is to get an approval of 5 lakh rupees on a certain project that you want to run within the organization, you need to say, these are the 3, okay, maximum 4 to 5 main points why you should give me that approval of 5 lakh rupees. Okay, so you're clear. What you want from the presentation is you want an approval of 4 or 5 lakhs from your management. So when you're going to talk to them, then you're going to say, these are the 3 to 5 reasons why I should get those 5 lakh rupees, right? If I take the example of presenting the final solution first, when you go into the meeting, you say, we recommend that you move your factory from Bombay to Goa or Bhiwandi by the end of 2021. That is our conclusion. And these are the 3 to 5 reasons why we've come up to this conclusion, right? It becomes very, very easy for you to start communicating your thoughts if you do it that way, right? Now, on the other side, you could also do this, right? So say, if you are presenting a thought saying that you need to move your factory from Bombay to Goa, right? And now you've made a case for that, and you've told them why the factory should be moved, and you gave your 3 points. After that, if you have to explain to them, how do we go about now moving our factory from Bombay to Bhiwandi or Bombay to Goa? The exact same logic prevails. You say, now, how do we move our factory? These are the 3 to 5 points, right, of how we go. Step one, this is what we do. Step two, three, step four, step five, right? So these are the 5 kind of steps through which we start moving the factory from here to there. So you can use it in just about every context of communication. Okay, now, once you've identified what your the maximum 5 points are, you need to substantiate each one of those points with 2 to 3 points each, right? So each one of these main points needs to be substantiated with the subpoints, right? And this is what the model is essentially, right? And if you use this model, like I said, your thoughts are better structured in your head, and in them people understand those thoughts in a much better fashion. And the beauty of this model is you do not need to speak the Queen's English, right, to get this model across and to come across as a beautiful communicator. Number two, irrespective of which language you decide to speak in, this is a language agnostic model. So this model works across every language on planet. You can use it in Hindi, English, Gujarati, just about any language in which you do business or communicate in your personal life, right? So let me repeat this thing. All your communication needs to start with you being clear on what the objective is of the communication or what the final solution is that you're going to present. Once you're clear that this is the objective that I'm trying to meet, now the objective could be to get 5 lakh rupees for a certain project. Now, what are the 3 to 5 reasons that I can give that audience which will help me understand, which will help me meet my objective? Once you're clear on what those 3 to 5 points are, ensure that you support each one of those points with 3 subpoints each. Okay, so I hope I've made myself clear. Okay, now let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the key concepts and how you need to go about thinking about it, right? So first, let's start with the objective or the final solution first, right? Start with that. So I already discussed this thing, being clear on the final objective. Think of the outcome that you want. Like I said, what is your goal? What is your purpose? What do you wish to achieve at the end, which is written here? And the best way always to think about it is actually think of the action you want from the other person. And again, the way to go about that is literally close your eyes and think about what you want that person to say at the end of your communication, or think about what do you want that person to do at the end of the communication, right? Because that's the very reason why you're communicating to that other person. So close your eyes and literally visualize that and try to write it down, that this is the objective of my communication. If you cannot put your objective of communication down in like one line, you are often not clear on what you're doing, right? In a lot of verbal communication situations or even written communication situations, there could be multiple objectives that you have within one presentation. No problem, as long as you're crystal clear on what those multiple objectives are. For example, if you have a meeting with your boss or your client, in that meeting, you could need his input or his principal go ahead on 5 different issues, right? In a 2-hour meeting that you could have with your boss, right? So there essentially there would be 5 different objectives that could be there when you want 5 different things from the stakeholder in front of you in a 2-hour meeting. As long as you are clear on it in terms of saying that, okay, these are the 5 things that I want from this thing, and therefore now I need to kind of bifurcate or separate these 5 things out and talk to him individually about each one of the cases and get my approval or get my input that I want from him in each one of these things, then move on to the next one. So in one interaction or one meeting or one presentation, there could be multiple objectives, but you need to be clear about each one of them, and that only happens when you think about the action that you want from the other side, right? Now, be extremely specific while crafting your objective or final solution, right? So I'll give a few good examples. I think we discussed a few of this. So an objective of a presentation could be, or a meeting could be, to get an approval of a budget of rupees 2 lakhs for an annual team offsite to Goa. The reason why I speak about Goa so much is because I'm from Goa originally, although I live in Bombay now, right? So yeah, so that could be the kind of objective of the meeting. So it's very specific. You're going in there to get that budget approval of 2 lakh rupees. Okay. Now another objective could be to so if you remember all the communication that we've done for this communication coaching, right? We've been very specific about what our objective is. Our objective through this communication program, if you go for the gold package, which is the 3-month package, our objective is that at the end of these 3 months, you need to get at least 50% better on 3 parameters. And those 3 parameters are: number 1, in your ability to speak or articulate your views; number 2, your ability to write; and number 3, your ability to listen, right? So we want you to get 50% better from where you started at the end of these 3 months, because 50% improvement is a huge thing, right? So look how specific we are with our objective, and we're trying to design this entire program so that we achieve that objective for both you and me with your support, right? Now, a final solution, the solution bit that we were talking about, you could start a meeting to say, to meet our annual targets of 12 crores, we need to hire 3 more business development managers and give each BDM 1 inside sales team member, right? So this would be the conclusion that somebody's come up with, that for this to happen, we need this. And now let me tell you the reasons why. These are the 3 reasons why we need those 3 business development people and 1 inside sales person under him. So you're crystal clear that to meet this target, this is the solution that I've come up with. And let me explain to you the 2-3 reasons. Sometimes it could be 2 reasons, 3 reasons, sometimes it could be 5, depending on the complexity of the issue that is there, right? So that's a way of putting a final solution across. And like I was mentioning earlier, right, the final solution, we recommend moving our factory from A to B within the next 1 reason. And these are the 3 reasons why we should be able to do it, right? Now, all of us
Swapnil,
know.
I have a
Yes.
sorry.
Yes. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, go on.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the objective and the final solution the same thing, or is the final solution a consequence of the objective?
It's a very good question, right? So almost all business communication always has an objective, right? So if you're making a phone call in the context of business, you're never just making a phone call. You're making a phone call for a reason, because you want some action to happen from the other end. If you're doing a presentation, there's always some action that you want from the other end. If you're writing an email, there's always some action. Now, while all of us in the context of business vaguely know what our objective is, we don't know that objective, or we don't think of that objective from the point of view of saying, what action exactly do I want from the other side, right? We do not think of it in a concrete, specific way. And that's one of the main reasons why most business communication is ineffective, right? Because we don't give it that much thought. Now, when you're giving a final solution across, if I'm a consultant or I'm a team leader, say presenting to my CEO, and I'm giving a solution across to my CEO, my objective also is that he buys into the solution that I'm giving, right? That's what I want to do in the end. I also want him to buy into it. But sometimes the objective also could be, listen, this is what I think, this is what my final solution is of this issue, but I want your input on each one of the 3 or 4 points which are there, right? That's what I want from you. So it's not always that, even when I'm presenting a solution, it's not always that I'd want him to just say a yes. Sometimes I could say, this is the solution that I have, but I myself am not fully convinced with the solution that I've come up with after my study. So I want to use this interaction with you to put my points across, get your views on it, so we can have a better solution that we can work on from this point onwards, right? So that's the kind of key difference between the 2 things. Sometimes there'll just be a very simple objective that you'll have, which will be very clear cut because you want a definite action from the other end. A lot of times when you're presenting the final solution, you're presenting it and there's still an objective which is attached to it, that is right there, but it's kind of mixed and mixed together, right, in a way. And the other thing when it comes to communication is we're communicating so much and so often in all contexts, we're communicating all the time, that these 2 things are often one and the same thing when you look at it, right? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, keep asking your questions, Arunima. It'll really help the people that are watching this class, right? Because these will be some of the same questions they may have. Okay, thank you. Have I explained this fairly clearly, Arunima?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Now, the second point is give 3 to 5 supporting arguments for the solution that you're providing or the objective that you have in mind, right? Now, what are some of the things to keep in mind as far as these main points or main arguments are concerned? Number one, this is something we discussed in the last class as well, right? The first thing to think of when you're communicating is who you're communicating with, because the process of communication begins when another human being is involved. That's why that person is the most important person or people when you're communicating. The hero or heroine of communication is always the other person. It's not you, because they're the reason why you're communicating. Therefore, once you're clear of what your objective is, what you want, you need to, and now all of this is happening to who or to an audience, right? When you're thinking of your main points, you need to think, are these points that I'm going to come up with, will they help me meet my objective, right? Will they help me meet my objective with this who, right? That's something which is very, very important. A lot of salespeople are taught this very often, and we could argue that all of us in a way need to be good salespeople, right? Or good at influencing or persuading people. So good salespeople are taught this thing where they say, you know, when you're interacting with a customer, you don't talk first, right? Ask the other person questions first. Try to understand him or her. Try to understand their world. Try to understand what their preferences are, their expectations are, and then you put your points across to them according to what their expectations, preferences, or what they are looking for in that product or service, right? Because if you start talking first, you'll have no idea what the kind of expectations of that audience are. Right now, can you do that all the time? You cannot really do that all the time, but at least you can be aware of the fact. At least you can think through the fact. And in a lot of situations, like for example, if somebody's communicating with senior managers, you know that senior managers think a lot because they often deal with P&Ls or profit and loss statements, right? So they always think a lot about money made or money saved in a certain thing, right? Because that's how their management looks at them. How much money have you made? How much money have you saved? So you know that that is always going to be an expectation or a point of consideration for that, right? So when you're putting your points across, if you don't keep a key parameter like money saved or money earned in mind while putting your thoughts across, you're not really giving the audience that much thought, right? I remember there was a very interesting ad by Maruti, a TV ad where, you know, the sales guy would give them a lot of explanations, and then one of the customers very funnily would ask them, "Per mileage kitna deti hai?" Right? Because most of us, if we're going to buy a car, one of the questions that we'll always have is, what is the mileage of the car? You don't even need to interview the person on the other side to know that that will be one of the points of consideration, right? So in a lot of times, what the expectations, preferences of the audiences is quite obvious, but when it's possible, you need to really understand the audience before you kind of know what are these main points that are going to work, right? So think about your audience before doing that. Okay. Now this is very interesting. Please pay attention to this point number 2, right? Now, once you're clear on what your objective is, a good way to think is, as soon as you think about your objective, you think, okay, if my objective is to get 5 lakh rupees from my senior management to initiate XYZ project, what are the 3 things that I can say to them, or what are the 3 arguments that I can make to them that will help me get the 5 lakh rupees from them, right? So you can just write down saying, this is my number 1, this is number 2, this is my number 3 point. But a lot of times your brain may not work like that, right? So the way to think then is, okay, you think, okay, this is the objective that I have, or this is what I'm trying to achieve. Let me just write down all the points that come to my mind with regards to what will help me get 5 lakh rupees from my senior management for project XY. Let me just type down and write down everything connected to this issue that comes to my mind. So then you write down all your points, right? And then what you can look at them, and then you can start bucketing them in like 3 broad categories, and then under them you can put your sub points, so on and so forth, right? So I repeat, either there are 2 ways of doing this, and both ways work. You're clear on your objective and you say, okay, what are the 3 points that will help me meet my objective? And then you're like, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3. But if you can't operate like that, the other way to operate is to say, okay, what's my objective? To get 5 lakh rupees. Now, what are all the points that come to my mind as far as this issue is concerned, right? So you literally kind of jot down all the points that come to your mind, and then you start bucketing them in category where you say, okay, this is the main argument, and under this I can put these 2 or 3 points, right? And as we go on and I show you some examples, you'll get more and more clarity on this, right? Now, the third point again is important, that when you are putting your points down, each one of these points, point 1, point 2, point 3, need to be distinctively different from each other, right? So they need to be different. If there's too much of an overlap between 2 points, it doesn't appeal to the audience, right? Whether it's one-on-one or one-to-many, they need to be distinctively different from each other. So if you're talking about fruits, it's like point number 1 is an apple, point number 2 is a watermelon, point number 3 is a mango, right? All 3 of them are fruits, but again, they're all different from each other, right? It's not like there is an overlap between them, right? So the points need to be distinctively different from each other. If you have any similarities, you can often put them as the sub points under the main point, right? So that's the way you need to go about it. So the way to think about your 3 to 5 main points is, number 1, will they appeal to the audience or the who? Number 2, the way of going about it. Either you think of the objective first, just put your 3 to 5 points, or think of your objective, jot down all the things, do like a brainstorm yourself, put down all the points, and then start bucketing them into the 3 or 5, right? And then put the sub points under them. And when you're putting these points down, they need to be distinctively different from each other or mutually exclusive from each other, right? Now, interesting. 3 more points connected to this. When you're putting these points down, you need to put them down in some kind of a logical format, right? Now, what does logical format mean? You can put them in a chronological format, which means where you can say, okay, this happened first, then this happened second, and this happened third, right? That's one way of doing it, right? One followed by the other. It could be in terms of timeline or when stuff actually ends up happening. If you're, for example, if you're talking about how do we move our factory from Bombay to Goa, right? This is step 1. So the thing that comes first, you put first. The step that comes second, you put second. The step that comes, so that is your chronological order in which you put it. The other way of putting it is in order of importance, right? Now, what does that mean? If I need to convince my senior management to give me 5 lakhs for a certain project, what is this first reason that will be the strongest reason that will end up convincing them to give me those 5 lakh rupees, right? Very often I can put that most important reason bang right at the start of the discussion, right? The second most reason I can put second, and the third most important reason I can third, right? And a lot of people ask me, why should we put a first most important one first and our second most important point second, and then the least important point third? Because practically what tends to happen in a lot of important business discussions, very often those discussions get derailed. Very often you run out of time. Very often if you're talking to senior people, they will cut you short, right? So what you want to do is, you never know when your communication could be cut short when you come to important stakeholders, clients. So you want to go with your most important point first so that they hear that most important point, right? So that's how you kind of logically structure these points of 1, 2, 3 chronologically in terms of importance. Now, this is again, each one of these points are super important, right? You have a question, Arunima?
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes. Through research, couple of places suggest that you should end with your most important point, because that's because the recency effect.
Correct.
So which one do you think is a better alternative, that you start with your most important or you end with the most important, especially if it's a longer speech?
Yes. If you have a very long speech that you're making, or a very long presentation that you're making, and you're fairly sure that you're not going to be disturbed through that presentation, right? That you're actually going to get to complete the presentation, or you're going to get to complete the thought. And let's assume that you have 4 kind of points that you're putting across. I would put the most important point first. I would still go with putting the most important point first. In the middle, I would put the points that are of medium importance. And at the end, I would put the second most important point, right? That's how I would go. If it's a really long presentation or a really long meeting that I'm going for, but I'm fairly sure that I'm not going to be disturbed through that presentation. But my experience tells me, Arunima, that in a day-to-day practical business scenario, what tends to happen, and especially if you're presenting to important clients, stakeholders, so on and so forth, that very often meetings and presentations get derailed, right? They get derailed, not intentionally, but very unintentionally, they get derailed. And therefore, I would say put your first point first, put your second most important second, put your third most important point third, right? So that's the sequence that I would recommend to people. But if you're sure you're not going to be disturbed, yes, it's very important to also end with a very strong point, right? Because that's what the recency effect says, that you'll go out with that particular point when you're doing it. And if it's a really short conversation, because we've said that the McKinsey model can work even if you're talking to your child in a 3-minute conversation, you can use it. Or if you're doing a 3-hour meeting, you can use the McKinsey model, right? It doesn't matter kind of where you're doing it. So I think that's a good question. I hope that's answered.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so the fifth point is number your points, right? And again, this is something which is so important that I've seen people not doing, right? And I often wonder why they don't do it. Now, what does that mean? You have seen every senior manager or every person at a senior level that's a very good communicator in business always do this, right? So they'll say, they'll start their presentations or their meetings like this. They'll say, in the year 2020, as an organization, we have 4 priorities, right? And then they'll say, number 1, right? They'll say number 1, and they'll say, reduce attrition by 3%. That's, by the way, the 6th point, or the heading, reduce attrition by 6%. But what they will always do is each and every point, they'll start by numbering it. They'll say number 1, and then they'll say the heading. Then they'll finish talking, they'll finish substantiating that entire point. They'll finish substantiating that entire point, and then they'll say, now let's move on to our second point. Our second point is improve per person productivity by 10%. Right? That's their second point with a nicely drafted headline again. And they'll finish talking about that entire second point, which is there. Then they'll say, okay, now let's move on to our third point, right? So good communicators always number their points, right? And they literally say the number, then say the headline connected to it. And then they'll close it by saying, okay, we're done with this point. Now let's move on to the next point. And we say, okay, number 2. And then they say that point. So that's how they always communicate. Now, again, there's so much of research that McKinsey put into this, right? And you'd agree with this just as a receiver of communication. When any person talks to you in a pointed fashion, but especially in a where he numbers something and talks to you, you tend to take that person a lot more seriously because you think that that person knows what he's talking about. So the consultants from McKinsey, they would charge such high fees to give their advice. They were told, do not ever talk to anybody unless you can number stuff down into point 1, 2, 3. Even if it sounds monotonous, it's okay, because the minute you start doing that of breaking your communication into point 1, 2, 3, automatically the person on the other side will think you know what you're talking about and will be willing to pay the fees, okay, that you deserve. So that's the entire logic that they would use for it. And it actually works, because the other reason behind using numbers is that it becomes very easy for your audience to understand the point that this is the first one. And the minute you say, now moving on to point number 2, it kind of catches his attention again, even if his attention levels are dropped. The minute you say, okay, now we're going to our second point, again, he starts listening to that second point that you're trying to make, right? And when you finish that, you say, okay, now moving on to our third point. He starts listening to that third point again that you're talking about. So just numbering your communication has a huge role in you understanding what you're trying to say, the audience understanding what you're trying to say, the audience also being able to consume the information, because the way our audience attention levels when you're speaking to anybody or presenting to anyone, it's a little bit like that. I don't know what this is. What is this called, Arunima? This kind of thing that is there in the hospital where I don't know what it's called, right? So what happens with an audience expectation? Monitor. Yeah, the heartbeat monitor, right? That's what it's called. So what happens with that heartbeat monitor is this is how the audience attention is. It will spike up when you say, okay, now we're going on to the second point, and then they listen to what that headline is that you're going to say, right? And then their attention level starts dip again. When you say that, okay, now we're moving on to a third point, then it goes up again, right? The attention level goes up because they want to know what's this third point. And they listen to the headline, and then their attention levels will dip again. So that heartbeat monitor is really how the audience attention levels are, whether it's a one-on-one conversation or it's a group meeting, it doesn't matter, right? That's the way the human brain operates. And that's why numbering and kind of separating things out is very important. Now, you would have seen, by the way, that most reports are often structured like this, right? As to what I'm telling you, it's the exact kind of structure that they follow, because a well-crafted report is a complex thought that people communicate to you. Very often books are put like this, right? You have a chapter number 1, chapter number 2, chapter number 3, chapter number 4. So they make it very clear to you that this is the first chapter. Now this chapter is okay, over. Now second chapter is starting, and then each chapter will have its own heading, right? So there's nothing new that I'm telling you. You've seen good communicators, whether they're report drafters or novelists, kind of use this way of communicating in some form or the other, right? So ensure that you number the points when you're getting them across, and we already have partly covered what headlines are. If you're a good communicator, if you have 3 main points, each one of those main points will have its own heading, right? Now, what is its own heading? Its heading is nothing but that point summarized in 3 to 10 words. That's what it is, right? That point summarized in 3 to 10 words, and so that you get an understanding of it. Now, headings are very important, and all of us have close to 15 years, at least 10 years of experience putting headings down, right? 10 to 15 years, because the way we wrote all our exam papers back in school and college was always like that. If you remember, we wrote, say we had to write a headline, we would say listen well to my colleagues, right? This would be a headline, and then you would underline this, put a dash ahead of it, and write all the rubbish to fill the page more often than not, right? So we always started each and every one of our points in an exam with a heading, and this is exactly what you need to do as your main point, right? And if you remember, as we grew up, we were encouraged to write one and then kind of divide our answer into A, B, C again, right? Put it into those sub points. So we followed this practice in a way through school and college. So it's not something novel or new to us in terms of putting our thoughts across, but unfortunately we have forgotten to do it over the years, right? So each one of your main points needs to have a headline that summarizes what you're trying to say through. Arunima, do you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why the main points are limited to 3 to 5? Because if you're writing a longer thesis or a report, is there flexibility to go beyond that?
There is research around how much the mind can retain, right, in a conversation that you're having. And what that research largely says is that when you go above 3 points, the mind finds it very difficult to retain information above 3 main points. So that's why they say 3, a maximum of 5 points is what you should put down. However, in certain situations, you may have to go to a 6th and 7th point if it requires that, right? So even if you remember this slide that we were putting together, and this, we always try to keep stuff down to 5 points, but here we have 6 points that we put across as the sub points, right? Here again. But we did that because we were like, okay, we have to get these 6 points across, right? There's no way we can either delete it or we can't do that. We have to put those kind of points across. Right now, your question is amazing, and I was going to get to that, but it's an amazing question, because one of the things that you need to do, and what good communicators do, is they're very good at identifying what are the 3 to 5 most important points. Right now, there could be 10 points that could support the argument of saying that why should you give me 5 lakh rupees, right? But what is seen is that a person often gets convinced on the other side, not based on 10 things, but based on the 3 to 4 most important things that are there, right? So if you want to meet your objective, that's not going to happen just by telling a person 10 things. It will happen by telling him the 3 most important things of that issue, and that will help you meet your objective. And very often, after you kind of elaborate on those 3 to 5 main issues, you can often just touch upon the other points as well, right? And if you've seen during this presentation, we more or less use that model of saying, okay, these are the 3 things that are most important, and then we have your other points. And that's exactly what all of us can do, right? So I just want to repeat it just in case I've gone a little roundabout. Your question was, should we have more than 3 to 5 points? And the answer to that is, as far as possible, don't have more than 3 to 5 points, because people either get convinced or not of what you're saying based on 3 to 5 points, because the human mind finds it very difficult to retain anything above 3 points to start with, right? Now, in a situation where you have a lot of points, focus on the 3 to 5 and elaborate on those 3 to 5, and the other points that you have, you can just put that in the end if required as the other points connected to that issue. But your ability to convince people or get your objective across should be restricted to 3 to maximum 5, right? That's the logic behind it. We take, Arunima, it's very interesting, but we often take some of our biggest decisions, and I often tell people, right? So often for people, the two biggest spends that they make in their lifetime is buying a house and say buying a car, right? These are two large spends that they make often in their life. And even if you kind of look at the logic of what are the reasons why they bought a certain house, they're often again restricted to 3 to 5 reasons at max, right? Those would be the 3 to 5 main factors behind which they bought a certain house or a certain car, right? It's not 10 reasons, it's often just 3 to 5 reasons, right? So therefore, a good communicator is very smartly knows how to prioritize and what those 3 to 5 most important things are and what he needs to keep aside, not to confuse the audience, right? So that's what he needs to kind of know and be very good at. Have I answered your question?
So yes, if I can put it in a very quick sentence, it's not often about quantity, but it's more about the quality. So you've got 3 important points as opposed to having 10 different points, right?
Yes, absolutely, right? And you could mention the other 7 points in passing, in a way, right? At the end, you could mention it in passing, but that's not the priority that you focus on, right? So yeah, so these are the this is how you go about identifying these main points, right? Now, back up each main point with subpoints, right? So this is again very interesting. Now we're down to this level. Okay. Substantiate and support each headline by giving supporting facts, data, statistics, and figures. If you're making a presentation, these can be represented in the form of diagrams, charts, graphs, and illustrations, right? So now you're going to back each one of your main points with subpoints. And these subpoints basically will be some facts, data, statistics, figures. Now, that's one way in which you can substantiate it. The other way in which you can substantiate it is by giving examples. And in the business world, a complex example is often called a case study, right? That's what it is. Or if in your personal life, giving an example is like giving a story, right? If you're a good storyteller, you're often nothing but a good example teller, right? It's a much simpler way of telling stories by just sharing examples, and people tend to love your communication. So you can substantiate each one of your points through examples, case studies, and they will turn out to be stories in the end. And of the main point, very often in the field of persuasion, sales, often you talk about the sub points could also be the benefits of what you're talking about, right? So I'll give you an example. If I'm a salesperson, I'm gonna say, you know, sir or madam, you should buy this car, and the first reason why you should buy this car is that it has an MPFI engine, right? That's the first reason. So the MPFI engine, essentially, the first reason that you're giving them is a feature of the car. And then as a sub point, you can tell them the benefit of that thing. You can say the benefit of the MPFI engine is instead of getting 15 kilometers a liter, you will get 24 kilometers a liter. That's a whole 9 kilometers more because of this MPFI engine. Now, given how much you told me you drive every year, this 9 kilometers more that you will get per liter will end up saving you 40 to 50,000 rupees per year. Right, and over a period of 5 years, you of course save close to 2 lakh rupees. Are you getting? So the sub point that you're making is a benefit of the MPFI engine, which is the first reason you said the person should buy the car, and then you prove to that person that you'll get 9 kilometers per liter saving, which will lead to 40,000 year saving, which will lead to 2 lakh rupees in 5 years, right, as a saving in the car. So that is how you can substantiate what you're saying by telling them the benefits of what you're talking about, right? So again, substantiate with facts, data, figures, substantiate with examples, substantiate with headlines. Now, when you start to use this model of communication, My suggestion is just identify what your main points are and simply think. You don't even need to think in terms of, oh, am I giving data? Simply think, how do I support or substantiate this main point that I have? What do I need to say to substantiate it? And that's a simple way in which you will find your sub points. So don't complicate it too much in your head. Say, this is my main point, this is my headline, and just say, okay, this is the way I can substantiate it by saying these two things. Now, you have to remember, like I mentioned earlier, these 3 points sometimes could become 4 to 5 points. These 3 points could sometimes become 2 or 4 or 5 points. It just depends on how complicated or complex the issue is or how much detail that you need to get into. So don't get too caught up whether this is 2 or 5. Don't get too caught up with whether this is 2 to 5. This is the broad framework you need to follow when you are communicating your thoughts to anyone, right? Now, what are some of the additional points that you need to keep in mind? And you've seen Arunima has followed the same model that we are trying to teach with you, right? We focused on those 3 main areas. These are some of the other things. Very often when you're having detailed conversations, detailed written communication, or making detailed presentation, before you get into these 3 main points, you may have to start your written and verbal communication by giving a little bit of introduction, background, or context about the subject that you're going to talk about, right? Because a person may not have the context of it. For example, let's take the same example that we spoke about earlier, which is my objective is to get an approval of 5 lakh rupees for project XYZ from my senior management. That's why I've come to present here today. So before I start my presentation, maybe I need to give a little bit of background about project XYZ, for which I'm here to get 5 lakh rupees from you. So I'll need to give some details about that thing. If I'm making a presentation or speaking to you about moving the factory from Bombay to Goa, if I'm making that presentation to a client, I need to kind of give him some background about where this thought came about or what I study, whatever background or information or context you think you need to give your audience. In certain cases, your audience could know everything about that issue, right? So maybe in that case, you don't need to give them an introduction, background, or context. You don't need to do that. And that's why we haven't put the introduction, background in the main module, right? We haven't put it there because sometimes when you're having shorter conversations, you may not have to get into the introduction, background, or context. But depending on who your audience is and depending on the complexity of the issue, very often you'll have to give a context, background, or introduction to the topic before you get into the main points, right? Doing it. And on the other side, especially in slightly longer communication or longer meetings, you'll have to end your kind of meeting presentation with a summary that you give. Now, when you structure your points across like this, it becomes so easy for you to give a summary, because all that you need to do in your summary is just to say, and to end my presentation, the 3 reasons why you should give me a budget of 5 lakhs. This is my number 1 reason. This is number 2, number 3. So it becomes so easy for you to summarize your articulation, because you're just going to mention these 3 points while summarizing it, right? You don't need to mention anything else. But during long meetings or conversations, this ending with a summary becomes very important. Okay. Now, this is another beauty of this model, right? The McKinsey model. When you are speaking to somebody and when you're putting your points across, after you put your point number 1 across to the other person, the beauty of the McKinsey model is you can stop at that point number 1 and you can ask your audience whether they need to clarify any doubts or whether they have any questions, right? So that's the kind of model that you can do. So I've shared my first point. Now, what questions do you have, right? And they can reply to that. They can ask you any questions or clarify their doubts or have some comments for that first point that you're sharing before you even move on to the second one. Then once you're done with that discussion around point number 1 with the audience, you can then go to point number 2, discuss that point number 2, and then you can finish and say, okay, now what comments, questions, or doubts do you have around point number 2, and get kind of clarity on that. And then you can go to point number 3. So even when you're communicating, it doesn't need to be one-way traffic, right? You can get one point across, stop there, get their input, questions on it, then move to the next one, right? Now, you would have noticed this in a lot of emails when people that are often good communicators put their points across in, they put their thoughts across in points in an email where they say 1, 2, 3. When you are replying to that email, it becomes so easy for you to just say, okay, I've replied in blue against each one of those points, right? So the communication becomes so much easier because that person is communicated in points and not just a vague paragraph. So you can give a point by point reply or question to that, maybe in a different color in written communication. Right? So it works well in both verbal and in written communication when you're doing it in both formats, right? Now, very often when you are talking about explaining very complex issues, right? When you're talking about explaining very complex issues, you can break the entire issue down into what, why, how, and I'll show you an example of this later. And then, so the overall issue, whatever you're trying to explain, is divided into what, why, how. Say the subject example that we're going to give you later is perception management. If you have to share something on perception management, you can say, what is perception management? And share 3 points around what perception management is. Then you can say, why is perception management so important? You can say 1, 2, 3. You can just give 3 points and you say, okay, now how do you kind of achieve the right kind of perception management? And then you can say, okay, so here you have 1, 2, 3 points. Here you have 1, 2, 3 points. And then you have 1, 2, 3 points here. And then you can further substantiate those points of A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, right? So for large subjects that you're explaining, again, you can do a macro breakdown of the subject into 3 points here. Then each one of those subjects you can break down into 3 points, and each one of these you can break down. And in some cases, you will go into great detail connected to it. In certain cases, you may not go into any detail, right? It's up to you when you're communicating and how you're communicating, right? So these are the 3 other things when it comes to putting across large complex issues. Break them down into what is this issue about? Why is this issue so important? And how are we going to go about doing that, right? So on a macro level, you've broken it down at 3, and then individually you can go into the details of each one of the points that are there. Okay, Arunima, do you have any questions here, or should I go on?
No, none from my end.
Okay, cool. Now, so let's move on to the examples of using McKinsey Pyramid Model, right? Often I've given you a lot of examples while explaining this, but let's look at a few more examples. Now, using the McKinsey Pyramid Model for a simple conversation that you may have with a child, you could say, you shouldn't spend so much time on the iPad, right? And these are the 3 reasons why you shouldn't do it, right? Now, if you see in this case, you're not really getting into an A, B, C, and not really getting into a whole detailed conversation. This is a very simple conversation that you're having with somebody, and yet what you're doing is you're dividing your kind of thoughts into 3 buckets. The minute you divide into 3 buckets, it's clear to them that this is literally a 5-minute conversation that you can use the McKinsey Pyramid Model for, right? So if those of you that think that, oh, I can only use this if I am a consultant and making a large presentation or in a large meeting, no, you can do it in just about every conversation that you're having with person, right? Of breaking it down like that in terms of a 1 to 3. You don't even get into substantiating. That's the beauty of it. And in a certain kind of conversation, for example, you may have 3 points. Okay, this is what I often tell people. If you are having a conversation with somebody and they say, you know what, I have very, very limited time. So can you get across your point in the quickest way to me, right? And if you have very limited time, you may tell the person that, sir, I have 3 most important points as to why we need to move our factory from Bombay to Goa. I have 3 important points to it. Point number 1 is this, point number 2 is this, point number 3 is this. So you get all 3 points across to him. And then you can ask the other person saying, sir, which one of these 3 points would you like me to elaborate on since you have limited time? So he would say, you know what, I'm clear on what point number 1 is. I'm clear on point number 2 is, right? Broadly, I know what it is. Elaborate on point number 3. Right? Can you tell the details? So then you just go into the details of point number 3, and then you can explain his ABC and take that 1 point into detail. Okay, versus taking the first 2. So sometimes you don't have, sometimes the other person could demand that you don't get into the details of everything. On the other hand, sometimes you could have 3 points that you're communicating with somebody, and you may just get into the details of 1 point, and the other 2 points you may not want to get in that much detail, because your point number 1 could just be so important that you just want to focus on that versus the other, right? So even depending on the situation and the person that you're talking to, you can kind of go into detail or not go into detail on each one of these points, which is again the beauty of the McKinsey model of communication, right? So this is in a simple context without getting into any detail. This is what you can do. Now, this is again an example that we've been running. I've been talking about for so long that you can do the same thing, right? My objective is to get an approval of 15 lakhs on project XYZ. It went up from 5 to 15 lakhs. And you can say the 3 reasons why I should get this approval of 15 lakhs for project XYZ is because project XYZ will save rupees 30 lakhs for the company in 3 years. And then you need to go about showing them how it will go, how it will save 30 lakhs, right? In 3 years, you need to kind of give the data, the facts, the figures connected to that of how it will save 30 lakhs. It would say it will increase efficiency by 5x per employee on a certain parameter. Again, give the data, examples, case studies, whatever you have that can substantiate what you're trying to say here. And the company will add revenue in of 50 lakhs in 3 years, right? And again, you go about substantiating what that is, right? Now, this seems like an amazing situation where you should really do project XYZ, but that's exactly how you need to get your thought across, right? So if you see, this is very specific of what you want is very specific, your objective specific. Each one of the headings that you've put across are so specific and so clear. So even if I just look at each one of these headings, I'm absolutely clear as to what the other person is saying. Now, what's a non-specific heading? Let me give you a non-specific heading. If I just said Project XYZ will save money, that's a non-specific way of putting a thought across. But if I actually put a thought across that will say Project XYZ will save 30 lakhs for the company in 3 years, that's a very specific way of putting your communication down. In one of our subsequent classes, we're going to be learning about the precision model of communication, where we're going to get into how to make your communication specific in detail. But the clue here very quickly for you, the way to make your communication specific is to quantify communication and detail communication out, right? So here, what is the non-specific way of putting this thought across? It will increase efficiency, right? That's a non-specific way of putting your thought across. And specific ways will increase efficiency by 5x per employee of the company, right? So that's a specific way. Company will add revenue. That's a non-specific way. But company will add revenue of 50 lakhs in 3 years. A very specific line for heading, right? And then, of course, you use all your other time in substantiating or supporting what you're trying to say, right? So this is what a detailed business presentation or a detailed meeting could look like when you're clear on your objective and you're using the McKinsey Pyramid model, right? Now, if you remember class number 1, often we tell you to make a speech for a loved one's birthday party, right? That's the exercise that we give you. Now, look at how you can easily use the McKinsey Pyramid model to do a speech, right? Now, when I actually do this exercise in a classroom and when I'm with people, I often ask them this question, and people often screw up right here. And I tell people, if you're not clear on your objective, you'll never make a good presentation, right? So if you're giving a speech at a loved one's birthday party, what's the objective of that speech? The objective of the speech is very simple. The objective of the speech is to make that person feel happy and special. That's the objective of the speech. Now, the minute you have clarity that this is the action that I want from my audience, my main audience is the birthday boy or birthday girl, and the action that I want from them is the action that I want is for them to feel happy, right? In a business situation, the action is you want something, you want a budget approval, you want to go ahead, you want their input, you want them to give you a data. But at a birthday party, the action that you want from the other side is for them to feel happy. Now, what is your speech about then? Your speech is very simple. Once you're clear that that's the objective, to make them feel happy or special, you need to think, what are the 3 things that I can share about my mother that will make my mother feel happy and special? And you know your mother well, right? So you know your audience well. So you really need to be able to identify those 3 main points based on your objective of making her happy and you knowing your mother and what will appeal to your mother. And then you say, okay, so these are my 3 main points that I'm going to share with the audience during my speech. This is one. So here in this, he says she has been more patient and the calmness more than anybody else that is there. So, you know, that's the first thing that I'd like to share about her. You know, the second point is the next one, but you identify what those 3 points are. And then you say, okay, now what are the kind of things that I can say under each one of those points, right? What is some facts that I can give under that point about my mother's patience and calmness? And what is the kind of, can I share some examples around that? And the minute you start sharing examples in your speech about your mother's calm nature and how she's patient, the minute that you can do that, you will become an excellent storyteller. And people will end up clapping at the end of the speech, right? And it doesn't matter whether you're reading it out then from a piece of paper. Even if you're reading it out from a piece of paper where you put your points down, the audience will clap because you've done it in a structured way and you've been very clear on what your objective is, which is to make your mother happy. And this is where people screw up more often than not. right? Because they think, okay, when I ask them what's the objective of the speech, they'll say the objective of the speech is to entertain people. No, if you're at a birthday party and you're speaking about your mother, your job is not to entertain people, unless you're the host of the party and you're meant to like pass comments and crack jokes and entertain people. That's another thing. But if you as the son or daughter is asked to give a speech, the objective is to make the birthday boy feel special. You have that clarity on the action, then your speech will be a lot better. Arunima, I'm assuming you have a question.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, often we are confused about the objective, right? So most
Yes.
people, if you were to ask them what is the objective of the speech,
Mm.
your instinctively your answer is to give a speech, right? As opposed to making that person feel happy. So how do you get clarity? Because I believe that I know my objective. My objective here is to give a speech. So how can I train myself to make sure I'm correct about my objective?
Arunima, like I mentioned at the start, and I keep saying this in every workshop, if you want to be an effective communicator, you need to have crystal clear on what objective means. More often than not, what people mistake the word objective with is they mistake the word objective with agenda, right? That's what they think. That objective means agenda, or objective means content of what I need to say. No, objective means what do I wish to achieve at the end, or what action do I want from the other side. So the minute you identify who's the main audience here for the birthday speech, and the main audience is the birthday boy or birthday girl, right? As soon as you identify that, now what action do I want from that birthday boy at the end? The action that you want is for them to feel really happy. That's the action that you want. So you have crystal clear, you're now crystal clear on what the objective is. The problem with communication is that most people don't take the time out to think about what their objective is, because it's not their fault. They've never really been trained well on how to communicate, right? We teach our children all kind of rubbish in school and college, but we don't teach them stuff that is most important, like how do they get their thoughts across in an effective way. So I don't really blame anybody for not having that clarity as far as what objective means, because it's just lack of good training around this. So I'm glad people are here attending this class and this coaching session. But does that make sense to you? Right?
Correct. So
Right?
when you say action, in this case, it may not necessarily that I want the loved one to do something, but again, the outcome is that I want them to feel happy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that is what my objective would be, as opposed to just saying that, okay, I just need to give a speech.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, like I think I ended up discussing this in the communication fundamentals. When you're writing an email to someone, you need to be clear as to what is the action that you want from the other person. Now, the action may not happen immediately. You may not reply to your email immediately. You may do it in 1 week, but you need to be clear that I need the email. The objective of my email is to get this report, get it in this format, get it by this date, right? So this is what I want from this email of mine. So you're not even getting the action immediately. In this case with your mother or father, the action may not be anything but to make them happy or feel a certain way, right? That's the action that you may want. When you're training somebody, right, the action that is there doesn't probably happen immediately, the action that you want. Yeah, if I want the action to be you to be 50% better at the end of the program, the action is not happening immediately. The action is happening after you go and start implementing these things, right? So yeah, you're absolutely right in that. But give deep thought on what the objective is and what you wish to achieve at the end. The problem is most people don't. I'd just like to add another thing. Given my experience of being the CEO of a soft skills company and also somebody that's trained people across all industries, it's shocking for me to see people from the top consulting firms in India that we end up training. And I've spent so much of time with these very intelligent, high IQ people from top consulting firms, top banking companies, just the who's who in the corporate world. And it's so crazy that, you know, when they present to me, because they're showing me what their presentations are and how they communicate in important meetings and all, when they're showing me their presentations, I just ask them 2 questions. I just ask them saying, who is this presentation for? So then they tell me who is it. Then I ask them, what's your objective? What action do you want at the end? And they look at me like blank, right? Because they've never really thought of the action that they want at the end. And the minute we kind of discuss that and they say, you know what, the action, this is the action that I want actually from this presentation. And then they literally look at me and they say, it's a 50-slide presentation and I can knock off 30 to 35 slides of it because they're irrelevant 35 slides. that I've put down, or I'm giving irrelevant information given that this is my objective, right? The reason why I'm sharing this thing is whether you're having a simple conversation with a child, whether you're giving a speech at a birthday party, or whether you're doing a complex presentation, whether you're talking to a customer, it doesn't matter what context, because a lot of people that are watching and attending this thing come from very diverse backgrounds, right? It doesn't matter what your background is. This is an all encompassing, language agnostic, industry agnostic, works across all channels kind of model of putting across. Very often, Arunima, when we are communicating even over WhatsApp, right, you've seen that we kind of structure our thoughts into points so often while putting thoughts across there. So it's got nothing to do with the channel or the length of the communication in any way. But just like you said, people often get confused. They mix up objective with agenda, right? And then don't think about it good enough. Okay, does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you can actually read this speech. I'll just give you a little bit of time, everyone, to kind of go through this entire thing. This is just a rough draft of what a speech could look like, right? Yeah, so I'm just giving you a little bit of time. You can pause the video right here if you need to kind of go through it. That was a suggestion Arunima had, so you can really read the entire thing without me wasting more of your time here, right? So again, she's given 3 points which are here, and yeah, and then she's concluded very nicely with this thing, right? And then you have an A, B, C. Now, a lot of people, when I share this model to them as a model of giving a speech, they say, but is this the only way to give a speech? And the answer to that is no, this is not the only way to give a speech, right? But this is the easiest way in which you can put a speech together. If somebody gives you 10 minutes to prep for a speech, I see no better way of putting it together than doing this or using this model of doing it, right? And I remember 6 months back, I was working with my uncle. He came to me last minute. It was his daughter's wedding, right? That is what was happening. And somebody went and asked him to give a speech, and he came to me and said, I've never given a speech in my life. Now, what do I do? Right? I've never gone on stage and spoken. I'm like, okay, come on, forget everything. What would you like to say that makes your daughter really happy? Right? Tell me about that. Tell me the thing that would make your daughter really happy that you'd like to share. He said, okay, this is my number one, number two, number three. I said, okay, give an example under each one of these things, right? He said, okay, this is the word. Done. He was ready within like 10, 15 minutes of what he wanted to say. He went on stage. Of course, he didn't speak like a Narendra Modi or Barack Obama, but he got through the wedding and people started clapping at the end of it, right? And did he speak in English? No, he spoke in Konkani, right? He spoke in a mix of Konkani and Marathi, and the people were happy in what he said, right? So this is not the only way to do it, but this is the best and quickest way for you to put your thoughts together on any subject if you're giving a speech or caught in a certain situation, right? Now, again, I'm putting this, you can pause this here, and this is, again, the exercise that we had for you in your first class around if you have an application for the promotion for a senior content manager, right? This was how, if you have to put an application across, besides your resume, what would you write in your email, and how can you put that thought across? So you see that there's an introduction here, and then this email has been divided into 3 parts. This is point number 1. So you can pause it and you can read it. Okay. Now this is point number 2, and this is point number 3, right? Around this thing, and of course this ends with kind of a summary or conclusion on what you'll have. And this becomes a very nice way of kind of putting your thoughts across. And you see in both these cases, there's a very nice headline here. The headline is numbered, it's put in bold, so it really catches your eye. Again, in this case, it's bold, it catches your eye. So this is a good way. You can pause it at whatever screen you want and read through the entire email. That will help you understand how the main point and sub point logics kind of end up working, right? While doing it. Now, right, if you have to write an article or a blog post, your objective is to tell your readers of how great podcasts are, right? So you're making a case for how amazing podcasts are. And then again, you can do it in this way, right? You can divide it into saying, now, number one point why podcasts are amazing is because they're convenient. The second point is they're free. The third point is that they're engaging and fun. And the fourth point is that you learn a lot of things. And then again, it's gone into kind of substantiating each one of these points. In some cases, there are 3 points. In some cases, there are 2 points around it, right? So that's the way you've gone around about doing it, right? In that case. Yeah, again, pause your screen here, and you can go through the contents of this thing, which will give you an idea of how you can go about writing anything and doing it very quickly. Okay. Now, before we go to our takeaways, I would also like to show you a more detailed presentation. I told you I'll show you something around perception management. This is one of the classes that we were doing for another initiative that we have called Work Better Club, and I'll just show you how that works, right? How we've done it there. Now,
Swapnil, while you are presenting this,
yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in our McKinsey, you can see that you've got the main headings, and every heading is substantiated by examples and data points.
Yes.
A good tip, I think, which we can elaborate here, is when you're starting out with especially a presentation or a speech, to first say that these are my 3 points, and then get into each point separately, right? So then you can spend time on every point. But then your 3 points or 3 to 5 points are presented right at the beginning.
Correct.
To your audience.
You mean the main
members.
Points, right? You're saying that these are the main points.
Correct, the main points. Right at the start, after you present your objective, present your main points, and then get into detailing each point, and not present the point and then detail it, because it'll help help the flow and structure of your content. Is that a better way to go about it?
It depends on the situation, right? So because we're communicating in so many different situations, whether you're going to reveal your 3 to 5 points right at the start, or whether you want to do them one at a time, that would depend on the topic that you're presenting. That would depend on the audience. There would be lots of kind of things on which it would depend. My general style of doing it, the way I prefer doing it, is I prefer doing it in the way that you just mentioned, right? Of saying that we should move our factory from Bombay to Goa, and these are the 3 reasons why we should move it. I'll show the 1, I'll show the 2, I'll show the 3. And then I will take each point and kind of go into the detail of it. And the reason why I like doing it that way is very often, given the lack of time, a person could say, I want to only go to point number 3. And that's more than enough. So then I don't even need to explain point number 1, point number 2. And a lot of times, if your headline is properly structured, people are like, okay, I'm sold on point number 1 and point number 2, right? You don't need to take the time and effort to go into the details of it. And you have to realize that in the context of most business, you want to communicate in a precise manner, which means you want to be specific yet concise. You want to meet your objective in the least amount of time. You just don't want to go and like spend time there for the sake of spending it, right? So my general way of doing it is to put the 3 to 5 points across first, right? Now, however, in the context of giving a speech, right? In the context of giving a speech, I wouldn't put the 3 points at the start, right? I wouldn't say, oh, you know what, I really admire my mother for these 3 reasons. I wouldn't do it that way. When I'm doing a speech, I want it to unveil one by one, right? I want the suspense to be there, and I want it to unveil one by one. So in that verbal context of doing it, I would just, say the number 1 reason why I admire her is, right, that she's an extremely calm and patient person, right? So I'll say that, then I'll go about giving whatever details I want to. Then I'll say point number 2, is that she's extremely compassionate and empathetic towards people, and then whatever I want to say there, right? Each one of those things.
Correct.
And of course, I need to have each point, like I mentioned, which is distinctively different from each other and mutually exclusive. That's what makes it interesting. So coming just
Correct.
to summarize my answer to you, whether you say all 3 points at the start or whether you unveil them one by one will totally depend on the situation that you're in. So think very deeply. In most contexts of business, I like to put the 3 points right at the start so the audience has clarity on what we're going to talk about. But in a lot of contexts of business, people don't like doing that, right? Because they feel that if I show my 3 points, people in the audience or the person may start arguing about, the second point before we get into the first one. So I just want to do it one by one, right? So that's a call you need to take based on the situation and the people or the person of people that you're presenting your thought to.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, so this is just a presentation for you, just for us to show you something a little more detailed. And we're still talking about McKinsey Pyramid Model. Huh? So this is not about perception management. I just want to show you a model of how we followed to do an entire presentation, right? So the objective here is, for me, the objective of any training sessions often are either I want to get people kind of in this case, 50% better. So I'm very clear. I want to get you 50% better on writing, speaking, and listening. In say a topic like perception management, my objective at the end is for each one of the people to pick up any 3 points that really appeal to them through this presentation and actually start putting those 3 points into action, right? So they can better their professional lives in some way, right? So that's my objective here, for you to pick up any 3 great points, because this is full of great points, and really start putting them into action so that's my objective here. Now look at how we've kind of done this presentation, right? So you say perception management and you're starting with the framework. If you remember, what I told you was first you start with what, then you go to why, then you go to how. Right now here you say what, we have 3 points of kind of telling you what perception management is. Perception management is also connected to the subject of personal brand. You can pause on each one of these things if you actually want to read the contents of it, right? You can pause the video and see the contents of it. And so then it's also connected to personal brand. So then we put 1, 2, 3 points explaining what personal brand is. Then here we talk about why should you build a positive personal brand, right? Why is it so important? Here in this case, we give you 5 points. Now, if you see here, we haven't gotten into the detail of A, B, C, right? So we haven't further elaborated on these 3 points because in this case, given that we had only 90 minutes to do this class, we didn't believe that we had to kind of we could go into the details of each one of these things. But maybe if we were doing a day-long session where people were sitting right in front of us, maybe we would get into the details of each and everything, right? So we're also keeping the constraint of time in mind, deciding whether we should go into the detail of a certain thing. But here we again just put 5 points. We've not gotten the details here of what we're doing, right? And then you get into the how part of how to build your personal brand, right? So that's something that we've gotten into. And here we've created like a acronym which is called Bake Your Pie. So PIE, and we said make sure that your pie tastes good, looks good. Okay, so here what we've tried to do, of course, is to give you a visual of a pie and try to create an acronym that'll really stick to in your head. Because if I want you to go and implement 3 things from what I've taught you, you need to at least remember them for you to implement them, right? So we thought of a pie, and then we said that PEI, and then we said, okay, these are the 3 points again that will help you in perception management. Number 1 is performance, number 2 is image, number 3 is exposure, right? So we've given you 3 points here, and the perception people have of you is always based on some reality, right? So we wanted to make this point to you, and then we say, okay, now let's get into the detail of P, right? So here in the detail of P, now look at what has happened. You divided, it's very interesting, right? You divided how into P, E, I. Now you've divided, okay, you divided the P point into like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this I probably you divided 1, 2, 3. And in some cases, even in this 1, 2, 3, you could again get into A, B, C. So you could again divide it further if you have a lot of stuff to say, right? So, but again, all of it gets married into, or all of it in a way gets merged into this thought of how do you create a positive personal brand, or how do you manage perception very well, of people, right? So that's the thing that you're doing essentially. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so here you have 5, then you go to I, and in I you only have 3 points, right? You have body language, grooming, and etiquette. And of course, in each one of these points, when I was speaking about it, I probably gave an A, B, C, or went into the detail of substantiating and talking about A, B, C. It's not put on the slide here because you didn't want to clutter the slide too much, but I went into the details of explaining each one of these things to people when I was doing this session, right? We went into E, and then we had, this was a more detailed point where we said, okay, exposure is create both offline, online, and then we went into, okay, what is the offline exposure that we give? So we again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here, if you look at it here, we've kind of designed up our slide differently, right? Following more or less the pyramid where we said on the point of exposure, there are 2 main things that we do. One is offline exposure and 2 is online exposure. Under offline exposure, I have, this is your A, this is your B, right? Under offline exposure, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then under online exposure, I have again the same. Right? Look at what I'm under online exposure. So under online exposure, I have 1, which is LinkedIn, and then I give some ABC, and number 2, other social media, and then I give an ABC. Right? Again, so it follows. Sometimes the point could be 2, 3. Sometimes you get into more detail. Sometimes you get into less detail. So when we were talking about what do you need to do in to tell your child why you shouldn't use the iPad that much or why you shouldn't use the mobile that much, it's just 3 very simple points that you get into, and you're not going into that much detail. Here, this is a big presentation, which is a 120-minute presentation. And again, you follow the same framework, but you're getting into a lot more details how you're doing stuff. But again, in most cases, it's 2 or 5 points, not going about that. That's the end of the presentation that you have, right? So even when you're doing a 90-minute to 2-hour kind of presentation, you're following the same thing. Even having a 1-minute conversation, you're following the same framework that is there. Right now, before we end the class, this is what you need to do, right? Please make a note of any 3 to 5 takeaways that you have from the lecture. So pause the lecture here and really think and write down your 3 to 5 takeaways, because as you know, when you go to your coaching session, you're going to have to first talk about these 3 to 5 takeaways to your coach. That's what you're going to have to do. Okay. In the live session that will be conducted with your coach, you will be expected to explain your takeaways and summarize the content of this lecture, right? So you need to both explain what are the most important points to you and also take the effort to summarize the content, right? The very nice quote, the reason why we follow this model, of course, the very nice quote that says the best way to try to learn is to try to teach, right? The best way to learn is to try to teach. So the minute you try to teach something or verbalize your understanding of a certain thing, you get clarity on whether you understood it or not understood. And of course, any parts that you don't have clarity on, the trainer will kind of, the coach will help you with that thing. And of course, if you have any doubts on this, then you can get them clarified from your communication coach. And you're always free to write into us, right? And we will get that clarified for you as well, right? So this is the place where you pause, get your 3 to 5 points. If you want to kind of go through the subject again, I would suggest that McKinsey Pyramid model is something that although very simple, it's very insightful. So maybe just watching this lecture once is not enough, right? You need to watch it more than once. So please go through it again, because like I started this lecture by saying that if you just understand this well and start implementing this in your life, this alone can end up improving your written and verbal communication by, I don't know, 50%, because there's a lot of other things that you're going to do around that, but it will really end up helping you in a big way, right? And also what happens is your mind starts getting clarity on how to start communicating once you understand structure of communication, right? Your mind kind of does that, and once you get used to this is the only way in which you'll be able to communicate. You will just be able to communicate. You'll just communicate in a structured way, and that's exactly what you need in the context of business, personal life, and for you to be an effective communicator, right? I know nothing as a model that is more effective and useful than this one, right? So understand it from the depths. Okay. Arunima, do you have any questions? Do you think I've explained this decently well, or do you think I've missed out on anything? What questions do you think our community is going to have around this topic that come to your mind?
I think we've done a good job. I've asked you all my questions as we were going through, so I don't have any questions right now.
Correct. Why do people not use this? In your experience, why do you think people don't use this model enough? What do you think are the
I
barriers to it?
first is
Yeah.
one is not knowing about the model.
Okay.
That would be the first barrier, because I'm not sure how many people are even aware that such a thing called McKinsey pyramid model. That would be one. Second is, I think, being intimidated, because it's something I would feel when I was first introduced to this model. It looks complicated if you don't take the effort to understand it. So we've been using it in our content for a while, but because I wasn't familiar with it, I would not really be sure if I've understood it correctly, and then to be able to apply it or to explain it to anyone else.
Correct.
And over the past few months, when I've been really studying this model, it's become so evident that it's actually not complicated in any manner. It's
Correct.
just because it's a diagram, that's how they represent it, but it's very easy and it's very easy to apply.
Correct.
So once you get clarity, you can apply it to everything and anything. And I do it in my content, I do it in my communication with you and my other stakeholders. So to me, those are the two barriers: not knowing that this exists, and then feeling intimidated because it has a fancy name, but that's all there is to it.
Correct. So I'll just kind of add to that before we end our lecture, right? So when you start communicating with this model, for all our community people that are attending this lecture, when you start communicating with this model, don't try to get it perfectly right when you're doing it, right? So don't think, oh, do I have exactly 3 subpoints? Are they, some data fact? The more you try to do it in a perfect way, it's not going to happen. The very simple logic is to think, what's my objective? What am I trying to achieve? Therefore, what are my 3 main points or arguments that are required for me to achieve this objective that I have of this communication? And now what are the things I can say under each one of them that will support or substantiate that main point or headline or argument that I have, right? What do I need to say under it? And as it happens, you will realize that the things that you will say under this is some fact, is some data, is some kind of sub-point connected to it, or some example, right? So even if you all go back to check the speech example that is given, or the email example, we have not tried to make it a perfect email, right, or a perfect speech. It's just something that somebody would give, if given 10 minutes of time, how somebody would put it together is what we've given there. And it's not a perfect data point, it's not perfection, but you still see that the communication is so much better than what would happen otherwise, right? Because we've tried to create examples that you would probably do very, very quickly and not do it with perfection in a way, right? Yeah, you were saying, Arunima?
No, right at the beginning of this presentation, we also said that the McKinsey, more than anything, it helps you structure your thoughts and put down your thoughts very quickly.
Yeah.
And because having worked on the examples myself, I've seen how real, how true that is. Because the moment you just kind of stick to identifying, okay, what your objective is and what your main points are, substantiating is not the issue. Correct. Usually people may think that, oh, I need to find data points and all of that's not at all where the challenge lies. It's mostly knowing what your main points are. And when you know your main points, what your main points are, putting supporting data is very easy because you've got clarity there. And similarly, like in the email example, in one of the points we talked about development of skills. Something I've written a point that I've been taking a lot of courses, and here I've attached my certificates from the courses. That becomes a data point. That becomes a representation, visualization of my supporting data. So coming up with those substantiating points is very, very easy.
Correct. So I think that's actually a beautiful example. In the email that we were writing about, if you look at how do I substantiate my point of, what was the point that you were substantiating through a certificate?
It was development of skills. So one being that I've worked on X number of skills. That was point number 1. And B was I've also taken multiple courses on these subjects. And in the email, I've attached the certificates of those completed courses.
Correct. So that's exactly how you substantiate it with some fact, right? You're substantiating it with a fact, and you're visualizing that fact through a certificate that you're sharing, right? So substantiating it is a lot more easier. Also, what I would kind of suggest to a lot of people is, especially people that may not be comfortable with the English language, because this is what I've seen happening very often, right? People that are not comfortable with the English language, and if you have to like get a point across to a stakeholder, a good way of thinking is, Be clear on what your objective is and what you want from the stakeholder, and then in your local language kind of think of, okay, now to get this thing that I want from my super boss, मुझे उसको क्या बताना है, ऐसे 3 point कौन से बताने हैं जिससे वो convince हो जाएगा, right? That's what I need to think. What are the 3 points that I need to share with him that will end up convincing him? That's what I just said in Hindi, right? And then really make a note of those 3 points of saying, you know, this is the thing that I actually want to say to him, because I'm not comfortable in English. I'm not like really getting what I want to say. So whatever your local tongue is, whether it's French, whether it's Spanish, whether it's Hindi, kind of think of, okay, these are the 3 things that will actually help me meet my objective. And then if you have to present it in English, then you can translate that same thought into English, right? Because very often people get so caught up with the language that they don't really know what they're trying to say, because they can best say it or think of it in their local tongue, right? And they get caught up with the language.
Like you mentioned, that is the beauty of this model, right? Because it's not only for long conversation, it could be for short, detailed, written, verbal, and it's not limited by language. It's not that you can apply and it can be only for English. So it's getting the model right, and then you can replicate it for whatever kind of communication you need to have, whether it's informal, whatever it may be.
Correct. Absolutely.
Once you get over that fear of understanding this model, it becomes very easy to replicate it in your daily life.
Correct. Yeah. I think the fear, very honestly, Arunima, since I've like been exposed to so many different management and soft skills models, I often find a lot of them very confusing, and I find a lot of them very intimidating sometimes. I don't understand them myself, and I've been a student and teacher of these things for so long. But this is one model that the minute I saw it, it's like my eyes lit up, because I'm like, you know what, this is so simple to understand and so easy to use. But of course, if you just have a mental block around models and stuff like that, you could end up having that mental block, but otherwise it's a relatively easy thing to understand. Before we end, just one last thing, right? So all good communicators, if you want to see like a reference of how this is done in a very detailed presentation, and maybe when we send the email, Arunima, we can add this thing, right? You can send the presentation that Dan Palota makes at TED.com, right? Where he presents a very complicated issues on the problems with charitable organizations and NGOs. And he uses this exact kind of breaking stuff down into different points, and a very complex issue he brings across in a wonderful way. So that'll be a good kind of sample for you to see another presentation which broadly uses this thought of breaking it down, headlines, so on and so forth, of doing it. And another example is, as we don't need to share this link, but another example is somebody like Jack Ma. Jack Ma is the founder and chairman of the Alibaba Group, and one of the richest people, top 10 richest people in the world, and the richest person in China. And he's, of course, being from China, he's not a very good speaker of English. But even when he needs to speak English, although it's broken English, he's so clear on what he has to say, because he uses more or less this model of communicating, right, to people, that he's so clear on what he has to say that itself helps him so much in getting his thought across, although he speaks not very fluent English, right? But his communication is amazing because he's so clear in his thought and he structures his thoughts so well, right? So yeah, anyway, take up these 3 to 5 key points. I hope you've enjoyed this class. If you have any confusion, please go through it again, because this is one thing that we're really going to train you on doing very well, whether it's your written and verbal communication. We're going to spend a lot of time on doing these things, because as discussed right at the start, you and the Work Better team, we need to work together to get you at least 50% better at your verbal, written, and listening ability by the end of this course, right? That's what we're trying to aim. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this class. Thank you, Arunima, for putting such great content together and being an indicative student with all the questions that you had. I'm sure that will help people watching it. And let's try to do this for every class. And I think that's going to help. Okay. Thank you very much, people. See you soon.